and I told her it's not time for pain medication, it's time for the epidural. Our son was in the NICU for almost 110 days. Hi baby boy and everybody else that has been following our story. If you haven't already, go ahead and leave the like button. Thank you to everybody that has been sharing your stories. These videos have done what I wanted them to do, and that's to create like a little community and just letting people know that they're not alone. So starting off with Jesse not being there that day. So Jesse had some work things going on, and that was the first night that he wasn't going to be sleeping at the hospital. So my best friend was staying with me, and then around 1 or 2, I started getting little contractions here and there. I put the band on because I knew that they were going to want to monitor my baby. And so that's what happened. I called the nurse over. So the nurse came in, she put the monitor on me, and the baby was doing well. However, the contractions were not picking up on the monitor. It was around 3 a.m. when the nurse told me, I think it's time to call Jesse to come over here. So I called Jesse. He was on like 2 hours of sleep that day. Jesse got to the hospital around 3:30 or so. By that time, I was already in high risk. And at this point, the contractions were still tolerable. It wasn't until later on that day that the contractions just started creeping up and were getting worse and worse and worse. And mind you, I don't really show pain on my facial expressions. I felt like the nurse didn't really believe me. Plus, the contractions were still not really picking up on the monitor. So there was that. I started asking for pain medication, and they gave me some, and they told me that the next round of medications that I could get if I needed more would have to be within 3 or 4 hours. So I took the first pain medication, and the relief lasted around 15 minutes. It didn't really work on me. So I had to wait another 3 or 4 hours before getting the next medication. After those 3 or 4 hours, they gave me something different for the pain, and that lasted 10 minutes. So I had to wait another 3 to 4 hours before getting something else. And I was trying to hold back with getting any medication in the first place because whatever I take is going to go to my baby. And so I was trying to avoid overdoing it. Although they were monitoring everything that they were giving me, but that was still in the back of my mind. They weren't sure if I was going to be delivering or not. And they told me that once I get the epidural, I would just have to stay in bed. Fast forward to around 5 or 6 p.m. where I couldn't even touch my stomach because I was in so much pain. The nurses would come and put the bed down or sit me up, and that would hurt so bad. It felt like if somebody was like ripping my insides. Around 5 o'clock, I had asked for more pain medication, and it was time. I was keeping track to the best of my ability of when I could have the next round. And they had told me that I had to wait because something was going on. I don't really remember what. And then later on, around 7, shift change was going on. So I had to wait even longer because of that. I ended up going 4 hours, being able to get that medication, but with none. At least that's how I remember it. After shift change, the new nurse came in and asked if I still wanted the pain medication. And I told her it's not time for pain medication, it's time for the epidural. So the nurse called the residents in to see if I was ready for the epidural, and I wasn't yet. At that point, the IV that I had went bad, and my veins are very difficult. They were trying to put the IV back, but they couldn't really get my veins. So they had to call the ultrasound machine in order to find my veins. And in the meantime, while we were waiting for the phlebotomist with the ultrasound machine to come in, the nurse was pumping the IV by hand. And then the contractions just kept getting stronger and stronger. And they got to a point where they were very consistent. It was time to get the epidural. So we were waiting for the new IV to be put in, as well as the anesthesiologist to come in with the epidural. They're trying to talk to me, but I am just not in the right headspace, and Jesse was my voice. Oh my goodness. If they would ask me something and I was in the middle of a contraction, he knew right away and he would tell them to wait, or he would answer their questions. So he helped me out so much. The phlebotomist and the anesthesiologist ended up coming in at the same time. So I have the machine just trying to look for my veins while also getting all of the information about the epidural. And I'm just having contractions left and right. There was so much going on. I was overstimulated to begin with, but that just intensified everything. They find my vein, they fix the IV, and they start putting the epidural. And I didn't feel an instant relief or anything. I was still very much feeling the contractions. But I remember just being laid back down on the bed and my body just started naturally pushing. And I thought, oh my goodness, this baby's coming right now. And the nurses were in there. They're all telling me to wait, to, try to relax. So the nurses are getting everything ready to leave the room and take me into the OR. And I asked them, why are we going into the operating room? What's going on? Am I having a C-section? And they told me it was just preventative and that they have more tools in the room. And again, my body is just pushing. I remember leaving the room and seeing the hallway, and I said out loud, "You're at the beach, you're at the beach." And I was really trying everything to try to relax. Thankfully, the OR was right next to high risk. So we were there very quickly, and I was still feeling some contractions. So I thought, I don't know if the epidural is doing its job or what's going on, but it was game time regardless. So as soon as they put me on the operating table and they tell me, all right, it's go time, that's when I felt the relief from the epidural. It was a matter of seconds right before actually delivering that I was good to go. I was great. I was back to myself and I was making jokes. It was great. Yeah, delivery didn't take long. Next thing I knew, I looked down and they put my baby on my stomach, and it felt like the whole world froze. My husband and I were waiting for him to cry. In the worst case scenario, the baby could be doing well in the womb, but once the baby came out into the world, the lungs could collapse. So I look down and I see my baby, and I feel like I stopped breathing. I was waiting for him to cry, and sure enough, oh my goodness, that's when all of this tension and stress from the entire pregnancy, it washed away, and it felt like I was able to finally breathe, and I had that relief. I don't know how else to explain it. Our son was on my stomach for a couple seconds, and I just remember looking down at him, seeing him cry, and he was wiggling around. It was such a joyful moment. The NICU pediatrician and the other nurses took my son, and I told my husband, go with him. Just go take pictures, take videos. I'm doing great. You just go with him. I ended up going back to the high risk area to recover, and Jesse came back with all of these pictures, and the baby was wearing a little beanie, and he was crying and getting weighed. They told me that the effect of the epidural would take around 2 hours or so to go away, so we were waiting for that. Between the epidural and the adrenaline and the need to see my son, I was like, let's go, let's do this, let's walk around. And once I was good to go, the nurse brought a wheelchair, and we were on our way to see our son. We did do a small pit stop at this doorbell, and that doorbell, when you click on it, a lullaby rings all around the hospital. And I just thought back to being in the cafeteria or being outside and listening to that sweet lullaby and thinking, one day that's going to be us. We're going to press the button and everybody in the hospital is going to know that my son was born. At this point, all of the nurses pretty much knew our story, so it was a very emotional time and they were emotional with us, so that was so sweet. Then it was time to see our son. Going into the NICU is a whole new world. Being in the NICU for the first time is very overwhelming. There are babies and incubators and nurses everywhere. We got into the NICU. We were told to wash our hands up to around our elbows, and we did just that. We were then wheeled into one of like the side rooms, and that's where our son was. Our son was in the incubator, and I remember looking down and he was so tiny and he was just wiggling and moving around. It was scary because he did have monitors and hoses on him and he seemed so delicate. Simply being there was an unbelievable moment, and being able to see my son. So because he did have the monitors and hoses and everything, we weren't able to hold him just yet, and so we put our hands in the incubator and we held his little forehead and his hands and his feet, his legs, and we were so happy. We were so happy holding on to him, seeing him and hearing him cry. We did get on the phone with our parents and we were showing him off and awing and crying and laughing, and it was just so much love and joy happening as we're seeing him. We ended up going back to our original auntie's room because the nurse had fought for us and wanted us to be back, and we're so glad that she did because we really wanted to be back. We get into our auntie's room and our nurse had decorated our whiteboard, putting congratulations, and then she comes in with Arby's. Now, I wasn't a fan of Arby's, but Arby's, if you're listening, sponsor. No, but I wasn't a fan of Arby's, but she had gotten us the roast beef sandwich. That hit the spot. It was so good. And I had told Jesse I'm not the biggest fan of roast beef, so I'm probably gonna take a couple bites and just give it to him. I ended up eating the whole thing. So we finished eating Arby's and Jesse had not slept for I don't know how long, and he was on 2 hours of sleep, so he fell asleep. I, on the other hand, still had all of the adrenaline going, and I just was so antsy to go back and see my son. I couldn't sleep, but eventually we went to sleep. The next day, I woke up so early and I wanted to just go to the NICU. When we got to the NICU, our son's nurse looked so familiar. I remember going to school with her. So I thought, oh my goodness, what a small world. We went to school together and now you're my son's nurse. Then later on, my mom tells me, hey, one of your friends is outside. And sure enough, turns out that one of my friends was a resident there. And eventually he ended up taking care of our son as well. It went from going to the hospital without knowing anybody to then finding out that I went to school with my son's nurse and doctor. Our son has been on oxygen support since he was born. He started off low and then worked his way up and then worked his way back down. Our son was in the NICU for almost 110 days. During those days, we went to the NICU every single day. We would wake up and call to make sure that he was good, that he was okay, he had a good night. In the afternoons, we would go for several hours. And then at nighttime, before going to sleep, we would call again. Sometimes I would even call 5 times a day to check on him. We would also ask for videos from the nurses and they would send us videos. Leaving our son at the hospital every day was beyond difficult. I remember there were a lot of days where I would be walking to the elevator and holding my husband's hand and just crying because, you know, we were leaving our son. But honestly, Jesse was and still is my rock. He is so strong and was strong for the both of us when I couldn't handle it. Jesse would often remind me that he's in the best place for his care and that I had to be strong for him. That's a hard pill to swallow, knowing that you're not as well equipped to take care of your son than somebody else. So after almost 110 days, after so many visits from the specialists and tests and results and oxygen and medication and NICU life, it was finally time to come home. So we went for a normal visit, and once we got there, they told us that he was going to be going home tomorrow. And at that point, we were told that we were able to stay overnight, and they had a room with a bed, and they would have our son there with us in his own crib and with the monitors and everything. We were there, and then it started getting warmer and warmer and warmer and warmer. We decided to take him back into the NICU and we would be going home. Our son went back into the NICU and we stayed with him a little bit longer, and then we were talking to the nurses there. Then our auntie's nurse came to visit us, and we were just getting all of this information, and by the time that we ended up going home, it was around 4 a.m. So at 4 a.m. we drive back to the house, and once we get to our house, we're trying to get things ready because our son is coming home in a couple of hours. We wake up and we're just running around trying to get things prepared and trying to over-prepare, but not feeling like we're ready, but also feeling like we're very much ready. We finally go to the hospital and we start getting through all the paperwork for discharge. Oh, we were given a lot of information, and I remember just sitting there like, okay, let's get this going. I want to be home with our son. I want to be able to hold him 24/7 and see him whenever I want to. And we're just packing everything, putting everything in bags. Our son did come home with oxygen, and I sat in the back seat and I was so nervous. I just wanted to make sure that the oxygen tank was full and that his heart rate and oxygen was well. That car ride was just so surreal, but nerve-wracking at the same time. I would try to look around and just thinking, is this real life? Am I really taking my son home? And then seeing my husband in the front seat, and it was so surreal. We got home, and that first week of being home was so stressful because he was on oxygen and we were scared of sleeping. So Jesse would stay up all night with him. And then at 4 a.m., I would wake up and I would stay with him for several hours. And so we were taking turns like that because we were scared of leaving him alone, even though he was sleeping. So there were a lot of learning curves. Update to now, he is doing so well. We are now weaning him off of oxygen, and that's going pretty well. He is such a happy and vocal baby. He lets you know if he likes something, he lets you know if he doesn't like something. He's a chipilon. He is smiling all the time, except for when new people are around or when other people are around. It's so funny. He yells. He's just so funny. He's such a loving baby. So now we're starting to go out a little more. We were hesitant at first because it's a lot. We travel with oxygen and the monitor everywhere we go, and it can be overstimulating sometimes, but it's time for him to get new experiences and have new adventures. And with that being said, Thank you to everybody that has been there for us, that has been messaging us, asking us how our son is doing. Thank you to those that have visited, and just know that your kind words, your prayers, your good thoughts, they haven't gone unnoticed. And thank God that we are here, that we are doing well. Our son is continuously growing, surprising us, making us laugh, and is being a happy baby. And for our son, we love you so much. Everything that we do is with you in mind. I just know that you're gonna grow up to be a good person, and you're gonna be helping other people, just like you helped us. I love you, my baby.